The first time I told this story out loud, my voice shook so badly I kept losing my breath. Even now, years later, I feel my chest tighten when I think about that night on Highway 50, the stretch folks out west call the loneliest road in America. I used to laugh at that nickname. After what happened, I don't laugh at much of anything. It started as a simple cross-country drive. I was moving from Denver to Sacramento for work, and instead of flying and paying a small fortune to ship my stuff, I packed up my old silver Tacoma, strapped down everything under a camper shell, and hit the road. I'd driven long distances before, and I liked the solitude. I liked the feeling of the world shrinking to a pair of headlights and a ribbon of road. But I'd never driven Highway 50 past Fallon. I didn't know how empty that part of Nevada really was. I left Fallon around 7 p.m., much later than I planned, but I'd lost time getting a new battery installed in the truck. The mechanics warned me I probably shouldn't attempt Highway 50 at night unless I absolutely had to. "It's dark, no service, no towns," one of them said. "You break down out there, might be a long wait for help." I brushed it off. The weather was clear. The truck was running fine. And besides, I'd grown up in rural Wyoming. Darkness and distance didn't scare me. But isolation is one thing. What I encountered was something else entirely. For the first couple hours, it wasn't bad. The desert at dusk is beautiful. Pink sky, open plains stretching so far the horizon curves. But after the last smudge of daylight slipped behind the mountains, everything seemed to collapse inward. No cars passed me. No lights flickered in the distance. The world felt sewn shut. About 30 minutes past Austin, my gas light flicked on. I wasn't worried. There was a small gas station marked on the map a few miles ahead. I'd planned to stop there. But when I reached it, the place was dark, closed. No pumps that accepted cards. I pulled over anyway, partly to stretch, partly because something felt off. The silence was unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. When I stepped out of the truck, the only sound was the ping of cooling metal from the engine. No insects, no wind, nothing. There was a payphone booth next to the station, the kind I hadn't seen in years. The glass was cracked and the metal door hung crooked. Out of curiosity, I pressed the receiver to my ear. There was a dial tone. It startled me so badly I whipped around, expecting someone to be there watching me. But I saw only the highway, the black desert, the scattered shapes of old sheds around the station. I hung up quickly and got back in the truck. I figured I had enough gas to reach the next town if I conserved. I told myself it was fine, that everything was fine. I hadn't driven 10 minutes before I saw the first set of headlights behind me. At first, I felt relieved. A little company on that road was welcome. But the headlights gained on me fast, too fast. Within seconds, they were right behind me, high beams blazing so bright I could barely see my mirrors. I changed lanes. The car behind me changed lanes too. I sped up. So did they. The road was straight, no crossroads, no shoulder beyond a shallow drop-off. I tapped my brakes to signal them to back off, but the headlights only grew brighter. I couldn't make out the car itself, just blinding white lights swallowing everything behind me. I hit 70, then 75. My truck wasn't built for high speeds, and I felt the steering wheel jitter under my hands. But the car stayed glued to my bumper. That's when they honked. It wasn't a normal honk. It was long, drawn out, like someone leaning their full body weight onto the horn. And it didn't stop. It kept going and going and going. An unbroken blare, a mechanical scream slicing through the dark. My heart hammered so violently I felt it in my throat. I didn't know what they wanted. I didn't know if they were drunk or angry or trying to force me off the road. Then the horn stopped, and the headlights vanished completely. 1 second they were there, flooding my cab with light, and then they were gone as if someone had flipped a switch. I slammed the brakes, skidding a little as I came to a crawl on the empty highway. Nothing behind me, nothing ahead. Just blackness. I forced myself to breathe, to think rationally. Maybe they'd turned off. Maybe there was a hidden turnout I hadn't seen. But my gut knew that was a lie. There hadn't been anywhere to turn for miles. That car disappeared. I drove on, slower now, every nerve burning. I kept checking the mirrors, waiting for those lights to appear again. Eventually, I convinced myself I'd imagined how close they were, that maybe I was tired, that maybe I'd overreacted. But I hadn't, because 20 minutes later, I saw something ahead on the right side of the road. At first, it looked like a deer or some animal, But as I got closer, I realized it was standing upright. A man. He was facing away from the road, head tilted down, arms stiff at his sides. He wore a dirty beige jacket and dark pants. His hair looked long and matted. He didn't move at all. I passed him slowly. My skin prickled. The truck's headlights washed over him, and I swear to God, just before darkness swallowed him again, his head turned slightly toward my truck. Only a few degrees. But enough. Enough to know he'd been waiting for me. I pressed the gas, trying to tell myself he was just some hitchhiker or drifter. But dread curled through my stomach. I checked the mirrors. The man was gone. He wasn't walking, wasn't turning, wasn't shrinking in the distance. He was simply no longer there. I felt panic rise up like cold water. My hands shook on the wheel. Every instinct screamed at me to drive faster, to get off that road, to reach other people. But there were no people. Another 20 minutes passed. My fuel gauge dipped dangerously low. I didn't know how many more miles until the next town. The truck lurched slightly when I drove over a pothole, and for the first time since buying it, I wondered if it would make it. Then I noticed a light in the distance. A flicker at first, then steadier. Not car headlights, something stationary. Relief washed through me so hard I nearly laughed. A building. A house. Something with power. As I drew closer, it became clear it wasn't a house. It looked like an old diner, one of those 1950s aluminum-sided ones. The parking lot had 3 cars in it, all old models, maybe from the 70s or 80s. The neon sign buzzing above the roof read, "Eat." Only the E and T were lit. The A flickered occasionally. I pulled into the lot, grateful to see any sign of life. The diner windows were foggy, but I thought I could make out shapes moving inside. I shut off the engine and stepped out. Immediately, the air felt wrong. Not cold, flat, still, heavy. When I walked toward the entrance, I glanced at the 3 cars. All of them had thick dust on the windshields. One had a flat tire that looked like it had been flat for years. The license plates were so faded I could barely read them. A creeping fear tugged at me, but the idea of getting back on that road felt worse. I pushed open the diner door. A bell jingled overhead. Inside, everything looked old. Not antique, just old. The booths were cracked. The counter stools had stuffing poking out. A jukebox in the corner displayed songs I didn't recognize, priced for a nickel each. There were people inside, 3 of them, 2 men and a woman. They all turned their heads toward me when I walked in, and this is what I realized all at once. They weren't talking, not eating, not moving, just sitting, staring. The woman's eyes were wide and unblinking. One of the men had his hands pressed flat on the table like he'd been caught mid-motion and frozen there. The third sat at the counter, shoulders stiff, head angled toward the wall. None of them acknowledged me beyond turning their heads. I swallowed hard and said, hi, you open?" No one answered. I took a step backward. My instincts screamed louder this time. Run, get out, don't stay here. But before I could turn around, the man at the counter spoke without turning his head. "You shouldn't be out there," he said. His voice was dry, brittle, like his throat was filled with dust. "I'm just passing through," I said. "Ran low on gas. Is there a station nearby?" None of them moved. The woman blinked once, slow, deliberate. Then the man nearest the window whispered, "It follows cars." Every hair on my body stood up. "What follows cars?" I asked, forcing the words out. All 3 slowly turned their heads to look out the diner window at my truck. The lights inside flickered. A low hum filled the room, vibrating the windows, and from somewhere outside, I heard a sound, a long, drawn-out horn blast. I lunged for the door and sprinted to my truck. I didn't look back. I didn't check the mirrors. I just slammed inside, started the engine, and tore out of the parking lot so fast gravel sprayed behind me. But I didn't get far. The headlights appeared again in my mirror. Impossible. Blinding. Close. The horn blared once more, shaking the inside of the truck. I pushed the gas pedal to the floor. The road curved sharply ahead, cutting between 2 rock formations. I gripped the wheel so hard my nails split. The truck struggled up a steep incline, engine whining. The headlights behind me grew brighter, brighter, and then, just as suddenly as before, they vanished. The next stretch of road felt endless. My gas gauge dipped below empty. I kept expecting the engine to sputter out, but somehow, miraculously, I made it over the final rise and saw the lights of Eureka ahead. Real town lights. Moving cars, gas stations, people. I nearly sobbed. I coasted into the first gas station, shut off the engine, and sat there shaking. I didn't get out for a long time. I didn't trust my legs to work. When I finally stepped out, I immediately felt the difference in the air. Sound returned. Wind, distant traffic, civilization, safety. I told the woman inside the station about seeing a strange car behind me. I didn't tell her the rest. She listened politely and nodded. "You're not the first to see lights out there," she said. "Some folks say it's miners. Others say it's just your eyes playing tricks in the dark." "What do you think?" I asked. She hesitated before replying. "I think some stretches of road aren't meant to be traveled at night." I stayed in Eureka until morning. Didn't sleep. Didn't close my eyes unless the lights were on. When I finally got back on Highway 50, the sun was fully up and the desert looked normal again. But I didn't relax until I crossed into California. I've driven that route twice since then, but never at night. Not ever again. Sometimes when I'm on a dark road and I see headlights behind me, my pulse spikes and my vision narrows. I have to remind myself I'm not on that highway, that I'm safe. But occasionally, just occasionally, those headlights will seem too bright, too close, too sudden. And when that happens, I swear I can still hear it. That long, unbroken horn chasing me through the desert. Story the end. It started on a Friday afternoon in late September. My friend Alex and I had just finished our last week of classes at the State University in Ohio. We'd been planning this road trip for months, just the two of us, no phones for navigation, no strict schedules, just an old map and a sense of adventure. Our goal was simple. Drive from Columbus down through the Appalachian foothills and hit a few offbeat small towns along the way. The car was an old, beat-up Honda Civic, the kind that groaned and rattled on hills and whispered on flat stretches. We didn't care. It added to the charm, or so we thought. The first day was uneventful. We drove through winding roads, stopping at greasy diners and gas stations, the smell of fries and coffee blending with the scent of the car's leather seats. We laughed a lot, argued a little, and marveled at the beauty of the hills as the sun dipped low, casting shadows across the trees. By the time we hit West Virginia, it was dark. We had planned to camp out at a small state park, but when we got there, every campsite was full. Not wanting to backtrack, we followed a detour sign that led us down a narrower road, the asphalt rough and cracked, trees pressing in on either side. The detour seemed innocent at first, just another scenic route, until the road started to narrow further, and the darkness felt thicker, like it wasn't just night, but something heavier pressing down. We saw an old sign barely hanging onto a post that read Pleasant Creek. The letters were faded, some missing. Alex joked about how unpleasant it seemed. I laughed, but my stomach twisted when we saw no lights, no houses, nothing but trees and fog rolling across the pavement. Then the car started to sputter. At first, it was minor, just a cough and a shake, but within a few minutes, it died completely. We were on a single-lane road, no shoulders, nothing for miles. I tried the ignition again, but it was useless. Alex grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment. Its beam caught nothing but mist and silhouettes of branches reaching toward us like long black fingers. I suggested we walk, try to find someone, anyone. Alex was hesitant, saying the road probably led somewhere, and we should wait it out. The Honda's engine had died only about a mile from what looked like a bend in the road. We figured someone might pass by soon. We sat in silence for a while, the fog growing denser. That's when we saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the trees. It was tall, unnaturally still, wearing what looked like a long coat. It didn't move closer, just watched. "Alex," I whispered. He turned, squinting into the darkness. "It's probably a hiker or something." I didn't believe him. The figure didn't look human. Its head tilted slightly, not quite right, and there was a weird gleam in the fog that reflected off eyes, I think, but not like human eyes, more like polished stone. The sound of a branch snapping behind us made both of us jump. Alex pointed the flashlight toward it. Nothing. Then we heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the tree line toward the road. We locked the doors, my heart hammering. The steps stopped as soon as we did. Then, muffled, almost whispering, the sound of a voice. "Why are you here?" Alex laughed nervously, trying to mask the fear in his voice. Probably just some kid messing with us. But I didn't hear it as a joke. The voice was too low, too deliberate, and the cadence was wrong, like it was forming words from the gaps in a sentence that didn't exist yet. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the figure disappeared. No warning, no rustle, nothing. Just gone. Alex and I didn't speak. We just waited until eventually the fog thinned enough to see the headlights of a car coming from the other end of the road. Relief hit us like a wave. We waved frantically, and the car slowed. A beat-up pickup truck with two men in flannel shirts. We ran to it, and the driver rolled down his window. "You boys all right? Car trouble?" he asked. His voice was gruff but normal, friendly even. We explained, and he told us to hop in. As we drove, Alex and I looked back toward the road we had been on. There was nothing. No mist, no figure, just empty trees. The pickup men dropped us at the nearest town, a small, almost ghostly place called Maple Grove. The streets were dark, only a few streetlights flickering. The hotel we found was cheap but clean, and we were too shaken to care. The next day, we decided to continue the trip, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us. In the sunlight, Maple Grove looked normal, the streets lined with small shops and diners. We got coffee at a place called Edna's Cafe. The waitress was cheerful, asked where we were headed. I mentioned Pleasant Creek. Her face went pale, and she leaned in, voice dropping. "You didn't see anyone out there, did you?" I hesitated. Figure?" She shook her head, looking over her shoulder. "Good, you didn't see anything, that's good. You don't want to see it. No one ever comes back the same after that road. Pleasant Creek, don't go there. Just don't. People get lost there." But curiosity gnawed at us. That night, we tried to look up Pleasant Creek on the old map. The road was there, but the town, it didn't exist. Nothing. Even satellite maps barely marked the road. It was almost like it wasn't supposed to exist, except for that stretch of asphalt we had driven. By the third day, we were already tired of small towns and quiet roads. We decided to swing west toward Kentucky, thinking the Appalachian detour was behind us. But strange things continued. On one stretch, we saw road signs that didn't make sense, one pointing toward Lincoln Hollow, a place that didn't exist according to GPS, another toward Old Pine. But the road ended in a dense forest, and at night I kept feeling like we weren't alone. I would catch shadows in the rearview mirror, just out of sight, gone when I turned my head. Alex started joking about road ghosts to lighten the mood, but he was sweating, biting his nails more than usual. He claimed it was just nerves, but I could see it in his eyes. He had seen the figure too. I didn't know if I was hallucinating at times, but I was terrified of looking behind the car when driving dark stretches. On the fifth day, things got worse. We stopped at a small gas station in a nowhere town. No one around except the attendant, a thin old man who didn't look at us directly. As I pumped gas, I noticed tire tracks in the dirt beside the pump, fresh. But they didn't match our car. They were wide, deep, like something heavy had walked there. I pointed it out to Alex, but before we could say anything else, the old man whispered from inside the station, "Go! Now! Don't stop! Don't look back!" We paid and got in the car immediately. As we drove off, I saw it, a tall figure standing in the gas station doorway. No face, just a dark silhouette. It raised an arm, but not to wave. It wasn't human. Alex screamed when he saw it, slamming the gas pedal. We drove miles in silence. No car behind us, no lights in the rear view. We didn't stop until we hit a main highway. Then somehow the tension lifted. The air felt normal, the trees receded, the fog was gone. It was as if the nightmare stretch had been erased from the map. We never spoke about Pleasant Creek again, not at first. But even months later, whenever I hear of abandoned roads or misty stretches in the Appalachians, I feel the same unease. Alex says he doesn't remember much, tries to joke about phantom hikers, but I can see it in his face. He remembers. And sometimes late at night, I feel that presence, the same way I felt it on that road. Tall, still, watching, waiting. We never found out what it was, and I don't think we wanted to. Some roads are not meant to be explored, and even if you drive past them during the day, you remember the fog, the silence, and that unnerving awareness that something else is out there, just beyond the tree line. Something that doesn't belong, and yet somehow has been waiting for anyone who dares to wander off the map. Story the end. It started like any other road trip. My two friends, Kyle and Jenna, and I had planned a weekend getaway from Chicago down to the Ozarks in Missouri. We wanted nothing more than a mix of cheap motels, campfires, and highways that cut through endless cornfields and backroads. Our car was packed with snacks, tents, sleeping bags, and an excessive playlist that we insisted on rotating every 30 minutes. I was driving, Kyle was navigating, and Jenna, of course, was the self-appointed DJ. The first day went as expected, laughing at bad radio commercials, stopping at a diner where the waitress was older than anything I'd ever seen, and exchanging glances with cows that lazily watched our tiny sedan crawl past. By the time we reached Springfield, the sun was setting, painting the sky in reds and oranges that made the flat Midwest landscape look almost cinematic. We checked into a budget motel that smelled faintly of mildew and bleach, but it was cheap, and we didn't care. Around 11 p.m., I woke up to the sound of tapping. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then it came again, sharper, more deliberate. I shook Kyle awake, and we looked out the window. The parking lot was empty except for a rusted old pickup truck parked 2 spaces down. Its lights were off, but the engine was idling, humming quietly in the night. Jenna, half asleep, mumbled, "Probably a neighbor," and rolled over. I had a bad feeling, but we didn't want to make a scene. Eventually, the noise stopped. The next morning, we hit the road early. We drove for hours, passing endless fields and small towns that seemed stuck in the 1970s. Around mid-afternoon, we decided to take a detour Kyle found online, a shortcut through the Ozark backroads. The road started paved but quickly turned into gravel, then dirt up, and then barely a path at all. Trees closed in around us, and cell service disappeared as if it had been eaten by the forest. I joked about getting lost in a horror movie, but the laughter was hollow. By the time we found a clearing big enough to pull over, it was already late afternoon. We decided to stop for a quick stretch. Kyle got out to check the map, Jenna wandered to take pictures, and I stayed behind in the car. That's when I saw it, something moving between the trees. At first, I thought it was just a deer, but then it stopped, and I could have sworn it was staring at me. Its movements were wrong, jerky, and deliberate. I called Kyle, pointing it out, but by the time he looked, nothing was there. Jenna returned, laughing nervously, brushing it off as a trick of the light. We pressed on, but the sense of unease never left. The road got narrower, and soon we were forced to drive single file along a strip barely wide enough for our car. Then, about an hour later, our headlights caught something in the middle of the road. A person, standing perfectly still, blocking us. I slammed the brakes. "Hello?" I called, but no response. It was a man, or it looked like one, but his clothes were torn and filthy, and his posture was wrong, stiff, unnatural. He didn't move as I slowly inched the car forward. Kyle whispered, "Just drive around him," and I did, hugging the far side of the road. The man, or figure, didn't move. I didn't even flinch. As we passed, I caught the glint of his eyes in the headlights. They weren't human. We didn't speak for a long time after that. The forest felt alive, watching, breathing around us. We came to a fork in the road. The GPS, which had flickered back on for a moment, suggested going right. It was narrower, darker. Without really deciding, I turned right. An hour later, our fuel light came on. Panic set in. We hadn't seen another car in over an hour, or that just the same oppressive forest on either side. Kyle suggested retracing our steps, but the path we'd come from seemed different. Branches blocked it where none had been, and the dirt had shifted as if someone had been digging or marking the way. Then we saw it, another figure standing in the road ahead, perfectly still. But this one was closer, too close. I swerved to avoid it, and the car slid off the road into a shallow ditch. No one was hurt, but the engine stalled. Jenna started shaking, and Kyle was pale. I tried the ignition. Nothing. The forest around us was quiet, but the quiet had a weight to it, pressing against the car windows. We debated walking to find help. There was a faint glow of lights in the distance, maybe half a mile away. Against my better judgment, we decided to leave the car and go. We walked in silence, the forest thick around us, every snap of a branch making us jump. And then the glow, whatever town or building it was, disappeared. Panic set in. We argued about turning back, but the path we'd come from seemed impossibly long. That's when we started hearing it. Whispers, faint, unintelligible, like dozens of voices layered over each other. They didn't sound human. Kyle and Jenna held hands, and we ran. Not far, but fast. Branches scraped our arms, and the ground was uneven. Suddenly, we came to a clearing, and a house. It was old, abandoned, with boarded-up windows, but a single light burned in the upstairs window. Relief washed over us, but it quickly turned to fear when the front door creaked open. We froze. The whispers grew louder. A man stepped out, smiling. Too wide, too sharp. His face was pale, and his eyes glinted in the dim light. Lost? His voice was calm, but something in it didn't belong in this world. We stammered, trying to explain. He chuckled, a sound that made our stomachs twist. He gestured behind him. He toward the trees. They always come back here. Before we could react, something moved behind him. Shadows darted in impossible ways, bending around trees and leaping through the underbrush. We ran. We ran until our lungs burned, until the forest thinned, and suddenly we stumbled onto a paved road. Cars were passing by like any normal highway. Streetlights, gas stations, civilization. We flagged on the first driver we saw, a middle-aged man in a pickup. He called the police after listening to our frantic story. Officers arrived, drove us back to Springfield, and we tried to explain what had happened. Of course, it sounded insane. There was no record of the back roads we'd traveled, no signs of the figures, the whispers, or the house. Our car? They found it later, abandoned by the side of the road, engine cold, no damage from the ditch, as if it had never left the pavement. We never spoke of it in detail again. Kyle moved to the West Coast, Jenna got married and settled down in Ohio, and I still drive, still take road trips. But every time I see a dark stretch of back road, especially when I'm alone, I feel it. The eyes, the whispers, the unnatural figures in the shadows. Somewhere in the Ozarks, in those back roads that don't exist on any map, they're still waiting, watching. And sometimes if you take a wrong turn, they follow. Story the end. We were 4 friends, Jason, me, Rachel, and Sam, all in our mid-20s, and we thought a summer road trip from Austin to Portland sounded like the perfect adventure. We'd planned it for months, mapped out every stop, and packed enough snacks to last a week. The first 2 days were blissful. Endless highways, classic rock blasting through the car, and roadside diners with greasy burgers that tasted like freedom. But somewhere near the Oregon-Washington border, everything started to feel off. We were driving through the Cascade Mountains when the GPS started acting weird. Not the usual recalculating glitch, but full-on losing signal and then snapping back with a route that made no sense. "It wants us to take this tiny back road," Jason said, squinting at the screen. The road was narrow, flanked by thick forest, and looked like it hadn't seen a car in years. Rachel hesitated. "Guys, maybe we should just stay on the highway." Sam, ever the thrill seeker, rolled his eyes. "Come on, where's your sense of adventure? It'll cut like 30 minutes off." Against my better judgment, we took it. The asphalt crumbled under the tires, potholes threatening to swallow the wheels, and the trees pressed in on us from both sides, dark and silent. The sun was setting fast, painting everything in a fiery orange glow. Soon, it was gone, and the road ahead became an inky black tunnel. Our headlights barely pierced the shadows. About 40 minutes in, the first odd thing happened. A sign, barely legible, read something like, "Welcome to Hollow Creek." Hollow Creek wasn't on our map. The name felt wrong. Too quiet, too sterile, like someone had erased the world around it. The next thing was a figure by the side of the road. A man, maybe late 50s, wearing what looked like an old, tattered flannel. He was holding a lantern, though the batteries inside flickered weakly. He waved at us. Jason slowed. "Do you think he needs help?" I felt a chill. Something about him didn't sit right. But before I could say anything, Sam rolled down the window. "Hey man, you need a ride?" The man didn't answer, just stared. His face was pale, gaunt, and his eyes, they seemed too big, too dark. Then he raised his hand and pointed behind us, down the road we'd just come. My stomach sank. Something about that gesture screamed warning. "Let's just go," I said, slamming the car in gear. Jason didn't argue. As we drove past, the man didn't move. He didn't even blink, just stood there as the darkness swallowed him. We didn't speak for a while, each of us lost in our own uneasy thoughts. About 10 minutes later, the car hit something. A sickening thump under the tires, followed by a scraping sound. Jason slammed on the brakes. "What the hell was that?" We got out. Nothing. No animal, no rock, nothing in the headlights. Just the forest, dark and silent, breathing around us. "Maybe a branch," Rachel suggested, though her voice shook. We got back in the car and tried to move, but the engine stuttered and died. Jason turned the key again and again. Nothing. My phone had no signal, of course, and the GPS was a spinning circle of error. Then we heard it. a low hum, almost like a chant, coming from the trees, not close but surrounding us. "Do you guys hear that?" I whispered. The hum turned into words, barely audible but unmistakable. "Turn back. Leave. Turn back." "Okay, I think we should definitely leave," Jason said, panic edging into his voice. He tried the engine one more time. It sputtered, then roared to life. We didn't hesitate. We drove forward, away from the voices, or so we thought. After another 20 minutes, we came to a crossroads. A fork in the road, both sides narrow, neither marked. The hum, or whatever it was, grew louder, now a clear whisper. "This way. No, this way." We froze. Jason muttered, "We can't stay here." We chose the left path, mostly because it looked slightly wider. But as soon as we did, the forest changed. The trees were closer together, their branches clawing at the car, scraping the sides. Fog rolled in, thick and cold, curling around the wheels. The whispers became voices, whispering our names now, softly at first, then louder, urgent, almost pleading. And then we saw it. Headlights in the distance. Another car, approaching fast. Relief surged through us until we realized it was coming from behind. Not ahead. It had been following us. The lights dipped, rose, dipped again, as if playing some twisted game of hide and seek. Jason slammed on the brakes, heart racing. The car behind did the same. Not a word, not a movement beyond the lights, but we felt it. Eyes. Watching. Calculating. We tried reversing, but the road had disappeared into thick fog. Panic clawed at us. "We have to get out!" I shouted. Then the engine died again. Complete silence except for the fog, the scraping branches, and the whispers. Now screams. Rachel screamed, a raw, blood-chilling sound. I turned to see her pointing. At the edge of the headlights behind us, figures emerged. Not one, but three. Thin, impossibly tall, their faces shadowed, limbs too long. They moved in jerky, unnatural motions, stepping closer with a precision that felt predatory. Jason tried to start the car again. Nothing. Sam grabbed tire iron from the back seat. "We're not dying here without a fight," he growled. The figures stopped at the edge of the light. Then one raised a hand. The whispers stopped. Silence. And then they smiled. It wasn't a human smile. Their mouths stretched too wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. The way they moved, their eyes, everything about them screamed wrong, unnatural, like something that shouldn't exist. Jason floored the accelerator, hitting the fog with everything we had. The figures didn't move. They didn't chase, but we could feel them. We could feel their eyes boring into us, through the windshield, through our skin. We drove until the fog lifted, until the road ended at a small, abandoned gas station. Neon lights flickered weakly, a relic from decades ago. The engine finally roared to life again, as if waking from a nightmare. We didn't speak, just drove past the station, back to the main highway. Hours later, we finally found a town, a real town, with gas stations, diners, people. We tried to explain what happened, but no one in town had ever heard of Hollow Creek. "Never heard of it," the waitress said, pouring coffee. "Maybe a logging camp?" We never saw the figures again, and our GPS finally started working. But something had followed us. Rachel swore she saw shadows flitting in her rearview mirror for days afterward. I kept hearing whispers when driving alone, soft, warning, almost regretful. We made it to Portland, barely speaking for the last leg of the trip. And though we went back home, our route mapped on GPS, we never took that back road again. We never spoke of it much, but the memory gnaws at the edges of sleep, a constant question. Had we seen the town, or had the town seen us? Somewhere in the Cascades, Hollow Creek waits. And if you drive there at night, you might meet the people who don't belong, who live between the trees, who smile when you run. Story. The end. It started as any other weekend road trip for me and my friends. 3 of us, packed into my old 2004 Ford Explorer, ready to escape the monotony of our small Midwestern town. We had no particular destination in mind, just a vague plan to drive south, hit some offbeat roadside attractions, and camp somewhere along the way. It was early October, and the trees along the highway were a riot of orange and red, the kind of scenery that makes you forget your phone exists. We'd been driving for hours, singing along to classic rock, eating gas station snacks, and making fun of each other. My friend Jamie was navigating with her phone, though the GPS kept rerouting us down increasingly smaller roads, some of them clearly not meant for a Ford Explorer. I kept joking that we were about to be eaten by a gang of hillbilly raccoons, and we all laughed until the car jolted sharply over a bump and Jamie yelped. Okay, maybe this is a little off-road, I said, trying to sound confident, even though the GPS was now insisting we turn left on a dirt road that didn't seem to exist on any map. Trust me, Jamie said, eyes glued to her screen. It's just a shortcut. I've got it. We turned anyway. The road was narrow and overgrown, the kind that barely looked maintained. After a mile or so, the sunlight started to fade, the shadows of the trees stretching across the windshield in a way that made the woods feel alive. My other friend, Mark, who usually had the strongest stomach for this kind of adventure, was unusually quiet. You guys, this is starting to feel weird, he finally said, glancing nervously at the tree line. Like, too quiet. I laughed. It's just a forest. Relax. But even as I said it, my stomach churned. There were no other cars, no houses, not even a sign of life. The GPS glitched, showing us looping in a circle. Then we saw the first abandoned gas station. It looked like something out of a horror movie. Windows boarded up, rusted pumps, weeds crawling through the concrete cracks. I joked that maybe we should stop for snacks, but the hairs on my neck were standing on end. Jamie insisted on pulling over to check the map. As we stepped out, the air smelled off. Not like bad trash or sewage, just strange, almost metallic. The wind whispered through the trees in a way that sounded like voices. The silence around us was suffocating. Jamie fiddled with her phone, trying to get a signal, and Mark muttered, "We shouldn't be here." I was about to tell him to chill when we heard it, a low, dragging sound from the far side of the gas station. Something heavy scraping along the ground. "What the hell was that?" Mark whispered, taking a step back toward the car. "I don't know," I said, heart thudding, trying to convince myself it was just a fallen branch. Then we saw it. A figure hunched over, moving slowly across the cracked asphalt. It wasn't walking. It was dragging something behind it, something that scraped with a sickening rhythm. It was too dark to see clearly, but it felt wrong in a way that made me physically sick. Jamie froze, staring at her phone as if it could protect her. "We should leave. Now," she said. I didn't argue. We jumped into the car and hit the gas, the tires crunching over the gravel. As we sped down the dirt road, the figure emerged from the shadows and started following us, keeping pace. At first, I thought it was impossible. It was humanly impossible. But the headlights caught glimpses, long, spindly limbs, a hunched back, dragging that thing. Mark was hyperventilating. "We need to call 911, he screamed. But there was no signal. Jamie was frantically trying, shaking her phone like it could magically work. The figure didn't chase us for long. After a few minutes, it stopped at the edge of the tree line, its head turning slowly as if watching us go. But the image of it was burned into my memory, impossible to shake. The way it moved, the way the dragging sound seemed to follow us even after we were gone. We didn't speak for a long time after that. The road eventually rejoined a main highway, and the lights of civilization felt unreal. We tried to laugh it off, blaming our imaginations, the isolation, the creepy aesthetic of the abandoned gas station. But deep down, we all knew something had been out there, something not human. We decided to find a campsite for the night and booked a small place in a state park. The ranger was friendly, but the campground was mostly empty, which should have been comforting, but it wasn't. That night, as we sat around the campfire, we could hear the woods shifting around us, snapping branches, and the wind carrying whispers that didn't make sense. I tried to sleep, but every rustle and crack made me bolt upright, heart hammering. Around 3 a.m., I heard a low thump against the tent. At first, I thought it was an animal. Then the dragging sound started again. Slow, deliberate, moving around the campsite. Mark and Jamie were frozen beside me. I grabbed a flashlight and peeked outside. The beam cut through the trees, but I saw nothing. Nothing except the leaves, moving in a pattern as if something was circling us, staying just out of reach. Then a low, guttural groan filled the air, and I realized it wasn't the wind. It was breathing. Heavy, wet, deliberate breathing. We spent the rest of the night in the car, engine running, doors locked, praying morning would come. When the sun finally rose, the forest seemed normal again, almost innocent. But the drag marks in the dirt leading up to the campsite were undeniable. Something had been there. We left immediately, taking the main highways, ignoring the GPS's tempting shortcuts. But even weeks later, driving home from other trips, I'd see the same pattern. Empty gas stations, overgrown dirt roads, shadows at the edge of the trees. I can't explain what it was, and I'm not sure I want to. Some nights when I'm alone, I swear I can hear that dragging sound, faint but unmistakable, following me through the quiet of my apartment. My friends have all tried to rationalize it, say it was a prank, an animal, or exhaustion playing tricks, but we all know the truth. We saw it. We were followed. And somewhere out there in the forests and backroads of America, it's still waiting for the next car to wander too far from the pavement. Story the end. It was mid-September when four friends, Jake, Lisa, Marcus, and Jenna, decided to take a road trip from Chicago to New Orleans. They had been planning it for months, eager to escape their routines, soak in the music, and maybe party a little. The drive down Route 55 was smooth at first. The sun was bright, the air crisp, and the fall colors made the highway seem almost picturesque. They laughed, played music, and shared stories, oblivious to how quickly things would spiral out of control. The first sign of trouble came when Jake, who was driving, decided to take a shortcut he found online. According to the forum post, it was a scenic route that cut off nearly 2 hours of driving. The forum had glowing reviews. People raved about quiet roads, beautiful forested landscapes, and little-known diners. They figured it would be a fun detour. At first, it was exactly that. They drove through dense woods, the sun filtering through the leaves, creating patterns on the asphalt. Birds chirped and everything seemed tranquil. But as they went further, the road became narrower and less maintained. Signs warning of sharp curves and falling rocks appeared, and eventually the pavement gave way to cracked asphalt with weeds pushing through. Jenna noticed it first. "Guys, I don't think this is a real road anymore." Marcus laughed it off. "Relax, it's fine. Just a little rural road." They pressed on, but the feeling of unease grew. The trees grew taller and darker. Shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should. The forest had gone silent. No birds, no wind in the leaves, just an eerie stillness that made the hairs on their arms stand on end. By late afternoon, they had reached a part of the road where the GPS signal dropped. Jake pulled out his phone, trying to find their location. The screen flickered, searching for a signal. Nothing. "Great," Jake muttered. "We're officially lost." Lisa, who was usually the most practical, suggested turning back, but by the time they attempted to retrace their path, they found the road had changed. What was once a narrow two-lane was now a gravel path winding unnaturally. Every turn seemed to loop them deeper into the forest. Panic started to set in. As dusk fell, they spotted an old gas station ahead. The paint was peeling and the lights were dim, flickering like they were about to go out. A rusty pump sat idle and the windows were grimy, streaked with dirt. They were relieved. At least there would be some sign of life. When they entered, the smell hit them first: mildew, rot, and something faintly metallic. Behind the counter stood a man, old, with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes. He didn't smile. He didn't even blink. He just stared. Hi," Jake said, trying to mask his nervousness. "Can we get some gas?" The man's voice was low and raspy. "Pump's broken. No one comes through here much anymore." Lisa glanced at the shelves. Most were empty, but a few cans of soda and bags of chips remained. They bought water and snacks, hoping the man might give directions. "Keep going straight," he said finally. "Eventually, you'll hit the old town." "Old town?" Marcus asked. He didn't answer. He just watched them until they left. Night fell quickly as they drove, and the forest seemed to close in around them. The headlights barely pierced the darkness, and every shadow looked like it could leap out at them. Then the car hit a pothole, or maybe something worse. The tire blew. Jake cursed. "Great, just great." They pulled over, and Marcus got out to inspect the damage with the flashlight. What he saw made him freeze. Tire tracks. A set of tire tracks that didn't match their own or any ordinary car. They were wide, deep, and ran along the edge of the road like some creature had been dragging itself along the asphalt. Guys, these tracks, they're huge," Marcus said. "Maybe it's a truck," Jenna suggested, though her voice trembled. "No," Lisa said. "Way too big." As they debated, a noise came from the woods. Low, wet, dragging sounds, like something heavy moving just out of sight. Jake tried to start the car, but the engine sputtered and died. Then came the lights. At first they were small, flickering like lanterns between the trees. But they got closer. Not a group of hikers as they hoped, but something else. Tall, moving erratically, and it didn't walk. It hunched, then straightened, then hunched again, its shape impossible to define. "Get in the car!" Jake shouted. They scrambled, but as soon as they closed the doors, the lights vanished. Only the engine remained dead, and the sound from the woods was closer now. Something was circling them. Hours seemed to pass. They tried to call for help, but the phones were dead. One by one, they heard noises near each tire, dragging, scraping. Jenna swore she saw shadows moving along the trees just beyond the reach of their headlights. Then came the knocks. At first, it was soft tap, tap, tap on the roof. Then it got louder, faster. Something was pounding, testing the metal of their car, making the vehicle shudder. "Who's there?" Lisa screamed, panic rising. No answer, just the pounding. In desperation, Jake got out with a tire iron, ready to fight whatever it was. The second he opened the door, everything stopped. Silence. The forest seemed to inhale, holding its breath, and then in the faint moonlight he saw them. Dozens of figures emerging from the darkness, taller than men, with limbs that bent wrong, faces blank and pale, almost mask-like. They didn't speak. They didn't run. They just moved, slow, deliberate, closing in. Jake slammed the door, heart hammering. "Get the hell out of here!" Lisa tried the engine again. This time it roared to life, and they sped off without a second thought, tires skidding on the gravel. The figures didn't chase them, but somehow they never left the corner of their vision. Every turn, every shadow seemed alive. They drove for hours, the road twisting unnaturally, like it had no end. Eventually, the forest thinned, and the first signs of civilization appeared. A diner, a gas station, an intersection that looked familiar. They had no idea where they were, but it was safe, or at least normal. Back in the city, they tried to convince themselves it was a hallucination, stress, the isolation of rural roads playing tricks on their minds. But when Jake uploaded the GPS route, it showed nothing. The shortcut didn't exist, not on any map. Weeks later, they saw a news report about a missing group of travelers who had vanished in that same region. 4 friends driving a car that matched theirs exactly. The bodies were never found. The case went cold. None of them ever spoke of it again, at least not in detail. But sometimes, late at night, they each got a call from an unknown number. Silent. But when they answered, they swore they heard footsteps moving outside, dragging slow and deliberate. The memory never left them. Every trip out of town, every dark stretch of road, carried the same dread. And they all knew, without saying it, that the forest had not let them go. Not truly. Story the end. And the first time I told anyone this story, I watched their expression change halfway through, from polite interest to a kind of silent, uncomfortable disbelief. By the time I finished, they weren't smiling anymore. They didn't ask follow-up questions. They just stared at me like I'd told them something that should have stayed buried. I don't really blame them. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't lived it. It happened in the summer of 2017 when my cousin Jake and I drove from Colorado to Tennessee for a family reunion. He had just bought a used navy blue Tacoma and wanted to break it in with a proper American road trip, which meant hours of open highways, gas station snacks, and his terrible playlist of 90s alt-rock that somehow made every song feel twice as long. The first 2 days were fine. Better than fine, actually. The weather held, traffic was light, and the truck ran smooth. We crossed Kansas, then Missouri, then dipped south to cut through northern Arkansas. It was rural, nothing but trees and winding roads, but pretty in that humid, southern way. What I didn't know was that Arkansas had stretches where you could drive 50 miles without seeing a house, a streetlight, or a human being that wasn't sealed inside another passing vehicle. What I didn't know was that it also had roads people told you not to take at night, and we were about to take one of them. We were already behind schedule, thanks to a massive detour earlier in the day after part of Highway 412 got shut down due to an overturned truck. Jake didn't want to spend money on a motel, and I didn't feel like arguing, so we kept driving long after the sun went down. Around 10:30 p.m., the GPS glitched and rerouted us. The new direction took us off the main highway and onto a smaller, darker road. I remember frowning at the screen. "You sure that isn't wrong?" I asked. Jake tapped it. "Service is spotty out here, but there's only one road going east, and this is it." The turn we took didn't look like much. No sign, no lights, not even reflective paint on the cracked asphalt. We rolled into it anyway. the truck's headlights slicing through thick curtains of trees that leaned over the road like they were trying to swallow it. "Man, this looks sketchy," I muttered. Jake laughed. "Relax. Rural America, dude. Not everything has streetlights." But he kept both hands tight on the wheel. We drove for about 15 minutes before we saw the first thing that made me uneasy. A deer, or at least I thought it was a deer, stood on the side of the road, staring at us. Its body was angled away from us, but its head was twisted almost completely backward, eyes shining like marbles in the headlights. I winced. "Damn," Jake said softly. "That thing's neck is messed up." But the deer didn't move. Didn't run, didn't even blink. It stayed perfectly still, head turned unnaturally far, watching us creep past. "Probably got hit," Jake said. But he looked in the rear view longer than necessary. We kept going. 5 minutes later, we passed another deer. Same position, same twisted head. I felt my stomach knot. "Two hit deer in the exact same pose? Come on, man," I whispered. Jake didn't answer. The road narrowed, forcing us down to about 20 miles per hour. The trees pressed in closer. The darkness outside the headlights thickened until it looked like solid black. I kept checking the GPS, but all it showed was a blue line and empty space. Around 11 p.m., we reached the sign. It was old, wooden, faded, with letters someone had carved into it decades ago. "No road services. Next 37 miles, travel at your own risk." What the hell? I leaned forward. "Turn around. Seriously." Jake slowed the truck to a stop, drumming his fingers on the wheel. "Dude, if we turn around, we lose an hour. Maybe more." "I don't care. This road is..." Something hit the back of the truck. Not hard, more like a tap. I whipped around, looking through the rear window. Nothing. The brake lights glowed on the empty road. "What was that?" I snapped. Jake shrugged uneasily. Maybe a branch fell. But there was no wind, not even a breeze. He looked at me, hesitated, then sighed. "Fine. Turning around." He started a slow three-point turn, the truck's headlights swinging across the trees. I watched them shift, shadows jumping like figures scattering. Then the engine sputtered. Coughed. Died. Jake froze. No, 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 no. Come on." He turned the key again. Nothing. The dashboard flickered weakly. "That doesn't make sense," he muttered. "Battery's fine. Truck ran perfect all day." The hairs on my arms rose. Something about the silence around us felt wrong. Too heavy. Too complete. Even the insects had stopped buzzing. "Try the lights," I said. He flicked the switch. They didn't come back on. We sat in a dead truck on a pitch-black road in the middle of nowhere. But that wasn't the worst part. Something moved in the darkness outside. I heard it, soft footsteps on gravel, slow and deliberate, circling the truck. "Jake," I whispered. "Something's out there." He didn't look at me. His jaw was clenched, breathing shallow. He heard it too. We both turned our heads toward the right window at the same time. Something stood just beyond the glass. Not a person, not an animal. Tall, too tall. Shoulders narrow, limbs long like sticks, its silhouette barely visible except for the faint outline caught by the moon filtering through the trees. Its head, if that's what it was, angled oddly, like the deer's. My throat locked. "Don't move," Jake whispered. The figure stepped closer. Crunch, crunch. Slow, careful footsteps. I held my breath until my chest burned. Jake tried the ignition again. The truck stayed dead. The figure stopped just inches from Jake's window. I saw its hand, or what looked like a hand, press against the glass. Long fingers, too many joints. That broke something instinctive in me. It felt wrong in a way that made my whole body recoil. "Jake?" I croaked. "Try again." He turned the key with shaking hands. The engine roared to life. The headlights blasted on, and the thing vanished. Not ran, not ducked away. Vanished, like it had never been there. Jake floored it. The truck lurched forward, tires spitting gravel. We sped down the road, neither of us speaking, fear choking both of us, too tightly for words. The woods blurred past in an indistinct wall. Every bend in the road looked the same. Every shadow looked like it was about to step out. Then Jake swore under his breath. "Dude, look." Up ahead, something stood in the middle of the road. It was the same figure, exactly the same, like it had teleported. "Go around it," I whispered. "I'm not slowing down." We swerved hard, avoiding it by inches. I looked back through the rear window. It was standing in the road behind us, facing us. Its head slowly twisted, following the truck's motion. My chest tightened like I was going to pass out. "Why is it following us?" Jake choked out. I didn't answer, because I knew, deep down, that whatever it was, it hadn't started following us on that road. It had been waiting there, waiting for someone, waiting for us. For the next 20 minutes, the road wound and twisted and seemed endless. The GPS showed nothing but the same empty line, like we were driving through a place that didn't exist. Then the truck's lights began flickering. "Jake," I whispered, "don't say it. We're close to losing power again." He gritted his teeth and leaned forward. Come on, just give us a few more miles." The truck stuttered, coughed. The dashboard lights dimmed. "No, no, no." Jake slammed his fist against the wheel. The truck died completely, coasting, slowing, coming to a stop. When the lights went out, the road disappeared. Everything went dark. For a second, neither of us breathed. Then I heard it again. Footsteps, coming from in front of the truck, slow, measured, coming straight toward us. Jake's whisper was barely audible. "Lock the doors." We both hit the locks at the same time. Click. The footsteps approached the hood. Stopped. Silence. Then, tap, tap, tap on the windshield. Jake squeezed his eyes shut. "Please go away. Please just go away." The tapping stopped. I forced myself to open my eyes. The thing stood inches from the glass. Its face, or whatever passed for a face, was smooth, featureless, except for two faint indentations where eyes should have been. Its head tilted with a slow, deliberate motion, like it was studying us. Then, its hand rose, not fast, not threatening, almost curious, and it placed its palm flat on the windshield. I didn't realize I was crying until my breath fogged the glass. I don't know why it didn't break through. It easily could have. The thing was wrong in every way something could be wrong, but it didn't attack, and slowly, like drifting smoke, it pulled its hand away and stepped back into the darkness. The footsteps retreated, soft, fading, then gone. For a long time, neither of us moved. Eventually, minutes or hours later, I still don't know, the sky began to lighten with dawn. As soon as there was enough natural light to see the trees, Jake tried the key one more time. The engine started immediately. No sputter, no delay, like nothing had ever been wrong. We drove, slowly at first, then faster. Within 15 minutes, we reached an intersection with a normal paved road. Fresh asphalt, road signs, a mailbox, civilization. We didn't speak the entire day. When we got to Tennessee, we told Jake's dad what road the GPS had taken us down. He frowned and asked us to repeat the name twice. Finally, he said, "That road was shut down in the 90s. Flood destroyed half of it. Locals say weird stuff happens out there. People get turned around." He shrugged like it was nothing more than superstition. But Jake and I knew better. Because of one detail, when we later washed the truck, we noticed something on the windshield. Faint. Almost invisible unless you angled the glass in the sun. A handprint. Long fingers. Too many joints. Neither of us touched that road again. We never will. Story the end. The first hour on the road felt like every other long drive I'd ever taken. Open highway, half-warm gas station coffee, and the dull hum of tires on asphalt that eventually sinks into your bones. It was early June, just after sunrise, when I left Denver heading toward a small town in northern Nevada where my cousin lived. I hadn't seen him in years, and after a rough few months at work, a solo road trip sounded like something that might clear my head. I didn't tell many people I was going, just my cousin, my boss, and my neighbor who watched my mail. My plan was simple: cross the Rockies, cut through Utah, and hit Nevada by nightfall. I wasn't expecting excitement, just long stretches of road and maybe an audiobook or two. Nothing about that plan prepared me for what actually happened somewhere along the loneliest stretch of Highway 50, an area people joke about, but not because they think anything bad really happens there. By the time I hit central Utah, the sky had clouded over. Dark, heavy stuff, like the kind that never fully releases rain but hangs low and eerie. Traffic thinned until I could go full minutes without seeing another car. Phone service dropped to a flicker. I wasn't bothered. I'd driven lonely roads before. Around 3 p.m., I passed a small town that barely looked inhabited. One gas station, one boarded-up diner, and a line of weather-beaten buildings with sun-faded paint. According to my GPS, which was struggling, there was another gas station 50 miles ahead. I figured I had enough fuel. About 10 miles past that town, I saw an old sedan pulled over on the shoulder with its hazards blinking. A tall man stood beside it waving one arm. There were no other vehicles around for miles. Normally, I don't stop for strangers on the road, but something about the man's posture made me slow down. He looked exhausted, like he'd been standing there for a while. I pulled up beside him and rolled down my passenger side window. "You okay?" I asked. He stepped closer. He looked to be in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, with deep lines carved into his face and eyes that seemed too alert for how worn out he looked. His hair was messy, not like bedhead, but like he'd been running his hands through it nonstop. "Thank God," he said. "My car died. No signal. I've been out here almost 2 hours. You're the first person I've seen." He pointed to the sedan, which looked old but not broken down. Its hood was closed. No steam, no popped tire. "I can give you a ride to the next town," I offered, feeling the uneasiness crawl into my stomach only after the words left my mouth. He sighed with relief. "I appreciate it more than you know." He opened the passenger side door and slid in. The smell hit me first, something stale, like old sweat mixed with something metallic. Not strong, just enough to bother me. I tried not to show the discomfort. I pulled back onto the road. "Name's Paul," he said. I told him mine. For a few minutes, we just drove. The road ahead was empty, a straight line into stretching nothingness. He kept fidgeting with the seatbelt latch, clicking it open and shut. After the third time, I glanced at him. "You okay?" I asked. He looked at me, then out the window. "Just trying to relax," he muttered. I nodded, though the tension in his voice didn't match the casual explanation. 10 minutes later, he spoke again, quietly. "You didn't see anyone else back there, did you? Any other cars?" "No," I said. "Why?" He didn't answer at first. He ran a hand down his face. "I think someone was following me earlier," he finally said. "A truck. Old and loud. I kept seeing it behind me for miles. Then it disappeared. Then my car died." I forced a half laugh. "You sure it wasn't just overheating? It's hot out." "It wasn't the engine." His voice hardened in a way that made me grip the steering wheel tighter. "I know what happened to my car." I waited for him to elaborate. He didn't. Instead, he kept twisting in his seat, watching the road behind us through the back window. We drove in silence for another few minutes till I noticed something strange. The sedan we'd left behind was no longer visible, though we hadn't made any turns or changes in elevation. The road was too straight and open for it to have disappeared so quickly. But maybe I just misremembered the distance. Then Paul sat up rigidly. "There," he whispered. I glanced in the rearview mirror. At first I saw nothing but heat shimmer and road. Then, like something emerging from underwater, an old pickup materialized far behind us, dark-colored. Headlights on, though it wasn't dark. "Is that it?" I asked. Paul nodded without taking his eyes off it. "It's them," he murmured. "Them who?" He didn't answer. The truck moved faster, closing the distance bit by bit. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was someone just speeding on an empty highway. But Paul's breathing grew uneven. His hands shook. "Paul," I said calmly, "you're scaring me. Who do you think that is?" His voice was barely audible. "You should have kept driving. You shouldn't have stopped." My pulse hammered. "Why?" He inhaled shakily and looked right at me. "They don't like witnesses." My throat dried instantly. Witnesses to what? Before he could answer, the truck behind us surged forward, growing larger in the mirror until I could see the shape clearly. A dented old pickup with a mismatched front panel. No license plate. Its engine roared like it was pushed beyond its limits. "Holy shit," I muttered, pressing harder on the gas pedal. The road was still deserted, no intersections, no houses, just endless desert. The truck sped up too. Paul tensed, gripping the door handle so tightly his knuckles whitened. "You need to get off the road," he said. "Now. There's no exit. Doesn't matter. Just turn, anywhere." Before I could react, the truck lunged forward and slammed into the back of my car. The force jolted us both against our seats. I swerved, regaining control just before I veered into a ditch. "What the hell?" I yelled. "They're trying to spin you out," Paul said. "Don't slow down." The truck rammed us again, harder this time. My tires skidded, fishtailing over loose gravel at the road's edge. I saw an unpaved side path up ahead, just a narrow dirt road cutting into a cluster of hills. Without thinking, I yanked the wheel and turned down it. The car bounced violently over rocks but stayed upright. The truck followed. Dust exploded behind us, creating a thick cloud. The dirt road narrowed between jagged rock outcroppings. I couldn't tell where it led, or if it led anywhere at all. "Left," Paul shouted suddenly. I turned left at a fork I hadn't even noticed. The truck swerved wide but stayed with us. Another curve, another fork, a steep incline. The car lurched as we went over a rise and into a patch of uneven ground. I slowed, afraid of flipping the vehicle. The truck burst through the dust cloud behind us, barreling forward recklessly. "We can't outrun them," Paul said, voice breaking. "Stop! Stop!" I choked out. "Are you insane?" He held up his hands toward the windshield. "They won't hit us head on. They won't risk killing me." It was the first thing he'd said that made no sense at all, but I had no time to argue. The terrain became too rocky to continue at high speeds without blowing a tire. I braked hard. The car slid to a stop. The truck screeched to a halt 20 feet in front of us, blocking the narrow path. Dust settled around it. The engine idled, rattling like something old and angry. Paul's breathing slowed. He closed his eyes. "They're going to take me back," he whispered. "Just stay in the car. Don't run. Don't make yourself a target." "What are you talking about?" My voice cracked. He didn't answer. He opened his door slowly, stepping out into the dirt with his hands raised. The truck's driver door opened. A man stepped out, tall, broad, wearing a dirty canvas jacket and a cap pulled low. His face was obscured by the shadow of the brim. Another figure exited from the passenger side, slimmer, wearing a bandana over their nose and mouth. Neither spoke. They walked toward Paul with steady, deliberate steps. I couldn't breathe. My hand hovered over my gear shift. Should I reverse, try to escape? But there was no room to turn around. Jagged rocks boxed us in. Paul stood with his palms forward, head slightly bowed. "I know," he said. "I shouldn't have left. I know." The taller man grabbed Paul by the arm and yanked him hard. Paul stumbled but didn't resist. The pair turned back toward the truck with him. I opened my door. "Hey!" I yelled before I could second-guess myself. All three froze. The taller man turned his head toward me. I couldn't see his eyes, but the motion alone made my legs weaken. "Let him go!" I shouted, voice trembling. A long, loaded silence pulsed between the rocks. Then the man tilted his head slightly, as if considering me. Paul's eyes widened. He shook his head frantically. "No," he mouthed. "Stay." The tall man placed his hand on something at his hip. A tool, a weapon? I couldn't tell. The smaller figure took a step in my direction. My instincts screamed. I dove back into the car and slammed the door shut, locking it. The truck's engine revved loudly. In my mirror, I saw the two figures shove Paul into the cab. Then the smaller one jogged around to the passenger side. The tall man climbed into the driver's seat. The engine roared again, echoing between the rocks. For one terrifying moment, I thought they were going to ram my car. Instead, the truck reversed, spun around with shocking control on the uneven dirt, and tore off back down the path, taking Paul with it. Dust swallowed them completely within seconds. I sat unmoving for several minutes, heart pounding so violently I thought I might pass out. The silence pressed in from all directions. No birds, no wind, just a suffocating stillness. Finally, I forced myself to move. I backed up slowly, inch by inch, afraid of getting stuck or tipping the vehicle. It felt like hours before I reached the main highway again. Once I did, I drove. I didn't stop, not for gas, not for rest, not for anything, until I caught cell signal again. I tried calling 911, fumbling with words, describing the truck, the men, the location. By the time authorities searched the area, they found tire tracks, but nothing else. No sign of the sedan Paul had been driving. No sign of the men. No sign of him. A deputy told me gently that sometimes people in remote areas set up situations to lure in helpful drivers, car trouble, hitchhiking, fake accidents. Sometimes it's robbery, sometimes kidnapping. Sometimes he didn't finish that sentence. No matter how many times I retold the story, I never felt satisfied. There were too many questions, too many moments that didn't make sense. How had Paul's car died? Why did he say they wouldn't risk killing him? Why did he seem almost resigned? I think about him often, about what he was running from or who he was returning to. And late at night, sometimes I hear the echo of that old truck's engine in my memory, climbing out of the desert dust, closing in on me. I haven't taken a solo road trip since. Story the end. The first time I ever heard the sound, I thought it was just the tires humming against the asphalt, one of those dull, steady road noises that fade into the background when you've been driving for hours. But it wasn't that. It had a rhythm to it, a slow, dragging pulse, like something scraping lightly against the rear bumper every few seconds. We were somewhere in northern Arizona, heading from Flagstaff toward Albuquerque, on a route my cousin James swore was quicker and prettier than the interstate. He always said it with that cocky grin he carried everywhere, the combination of charm and trouble. He was 24 and convinced nothing bad ever really happened to him. I was a year younger and less inclined to tempt fate, especially on long stretches of cracked two-lane roads that seemed to wind endlessly through nothing but desert and sky. It was past midnight. The air smelled like hot metal and dust, even with the windows cracked a few inches. The dashboard lights glowed a faint orange, illuminating the empty soda cans rolling around by my feet. We hadn't passed another car in nearly an hour. I heard the scraping again. "Do you hear that?" I asked. James tapped his fingers on the steering wheel. "Hear what?" "That sound, like something hitting the car." He shrugged. "Probably a rock stuck in the tread. We ran over a bunch back by that washout." But it didn't sound like a rock. It sounded like something trying to get in. I let it go because arguing with James on an overnight drive was pointless. He'd just make a joke, and I'd spend the next hour annoyed and awake. A few minutes later, as we crested a hill, the radio crackled. A burst of static so loud I flinched. James hit the dial, but it wasn't the station. The entire radio went dead, then popped back to life with nothing but white noise. We looked at each other. "You think the antenna's loose?" I asked. Maybe, but the way he said it, careful, slow, told me he didn't believe that. The road ahead curved around a rocky ridge, and our headlights swept over a green highway sign that was so riddled with bullet holes it barely hung together. Someone had spray-painted a symbol across its face, a looping shape like a crooked 8 or maybe 2 overlapping circles. James whistled. "Someone out here was bored. Or angry," I muttered. We drove on. The scraping sound came again, louder this time, and unmistakably from behind us. I twisted in my seat, staring through the rear window, but the night swallowed everything. The road behind us was just blackness, no taillights, no distant glow, not even stars on the horizon. "Pull over," I said. "Why?" "Because something's wrong with the car." James sighed like I was ruining the adventure, but he slowed anyway and rolled us onto a patch of gravel off the shoulder. The engine ticked as it cooled. The desert was silent except for the faint whisper of wind. He climbed out with the flashlight from the glove box. I stayed inside at first, watching him sweep the beam across the bumper, the tires, the underside. He crouched, checked the wheel wells, then stood up. "Nothing," he called. "Looks fine." The scraping sound echoed again, but this time it wasn't from the car. It was from the darkness to our right. James's flashlight swung toward the noise, illuminating scattered brush and low mesas. Nothing moved. The beam trembled slightly in his hand, and I knew he heard it too, even if he'd refused to admit it. "I'm getting back in the car," I said. "Yeah," he agreed quietly. "Same." Once we were inside with the doors locked, he started the engine and turned back onto the road without another word. He turned the radio off completely, and the silence left me listening for every little thing. We didn't talk for a long time. Then, about 20 minutes later, we saw the first lights, dim and orange, flickering in the distance like lanterns. "Finally," James breathed. "A town." But as we drew closer, it didn't look like a real town. There were only 4 buildings, all old, all wooden, and all gathered around what looked like an abandoned gas station with a rusted sign that said Clear Creek. Only 2 of the buildings had lights inside, warm and oddly inviting considering the emptiness. "Want to stop?" James asked. "No," I said instantly. He laughed. "Relax, I'm not stopping. This place looks like it charges $5 to breathe the air." But the road narrowed suddenly, funneling us between the buildings. To the left was a boarded-up general store with a faded mural of a smiling family holding canned goods. To the right was a diner with one neon tube still flickering open, though the windows were too dirty to see inside. As we passed the gas station, I noticed something. There were no pumps, only cracked concrete pads where pumps once stood. And then I saw a man standing behind the station. He was tall, too tall, thin in a way that looked painful. His clothes hung off him like they'd been soaked and dried stiff. His head tilted slightly as he watched us. I couldn't see his eyes, but I felt them. "Did you see that?" I whispered. James forced a laugh. "Probably some drunk, or a scarecrow." "That wasn't a scarecrow." The man stepped forward just one slow step, as if testing the ground. James pressed the accelerator. We cleared the last building and left the strange cluster behind. My chest finally loosened, but only for a moment. I turned around again, and I swear I saw the man walk out onto the center of the road, watching us drive away. James reached for a bottle of water, and just then the scraping returned. Violent, loud, like nails dragging across metal. Both of us jerked in our seats. "No way that's the tires," I whispered. A thump shook the car. James swore and tightened his grip on the wheel. "What the hell was that?" he shouted. "I don't know. Just drive." Another thump, harder, like something hitting the trunk. James floored it. The speedometer climbed, the desert blurred, but the hits didn't stop. They came faster, heavier, as though something was climbing up the back of the car. "Is it an animal?" he yelled. "No animal does that." The roof dented, actually dented, inward for a split second. I screamed. James swerved, fighting to keep us on the road. The car fishtailed, and for a moment I thought we were going to roll. Then everything stopped. No scraping, no thumping, just the sound of the engine roaring and our shaky breaths. James slowed gradually, terrified of stopping, but terrified of crashing too. When we finally steadied out, he said, "I'm not pulling over. I don't care if the engine falls out." "Good," I said, trembling. "Don't." We drove for another 20 minutes before we saw a proper highway sign with reflective paint and clean lettering. I had never been so relieved to see a piece of metal. We turned onto I-40, merging into the occasional flow of long-haul trucks and late-night drivers. Civilization, safety, but not relief. Not really. Because when James checked the mirror, he went completely still. "What?" I asked. His voice was barely audible. "Don't turn around." My blood turned cold. "James, what do you see?" He swallowed. "There's something in the back seat." My heart stopped. The back seat. I hadn't looked at it since we left the desert. My body locked up, too afraid to even shift my eyes. "Are you sure?" I whispered. "Yes." He blinked hard, breath shaking. "It's curled down on the floor. I see its arm." I couldn't breathe. I didn't want to look. I didn't want it to know I knew it was there. "Okay," I said, forcing my voice steady. "What do we do?" James shook his head. "I don't know. I don't know." We passed under a bright overpass light, and something pale flashed reflected in the rearview mirror. I saw it too. A limb, thin, too thin, bent at an awful angle. I couldn't stop a small whimper from escaping my throat. The limb moved. James jerked the wheel, caught himself, and steadied the car. "Pull into the next rest stop," I said, surprising myself with how certain my voice sounded. "A busy one, somewhere with people." He nodded, eyes fixed ahead. Minutes crawled by like hours. Finally, we saw the blue sign for a rest area. Food, bathrooms, vending, open 24 hours. James signaled, hands shaking, and took the ramp off the highway. The parking lot was brightly lit, half filled with cars and semis. People moved around. Real people. As soon as we rolled to a stop, both of us threw open our doors and bolted out of the car. James yelled, "Call the police!" But when I turned back to the car, the back door on my side was open, and whatever had been inside was gone. We didn't go back to the car for almost 20 minutes. Not until two truckers noticed how panicked we were and offered to look for us. They checked the back seat, the trunk, the roof, the undercarriage. Nothing. No footprints, no dents, no scratches. Nothing but one small thing lying on the back floorboard. A strip of fabric. Dirty, wet, and frayed, like it had been torn from a sleeve. We called the police anyway. They searched the whole area, but there was no sign of anyone. They didn't believe us, or if they did, they pretended not to. When they left, James refused to drive another mile until sunrise. We waited in the brightly lit rest stop, surrounded by strangers, jumping every time someone walked behind us. Eventually, we drove again. Daylight made everything feel distant, almost imaginary. But neither of us ever took that desert route again. And for months afterward, every time I got into a car at night, I checked the backseat 3 times. I still do. Sometimes late at night, I hear that scraping sound again and in my memory. Slow, rhythmic, patient. And I wonder if we really escaped that thing in the desert, or if it's still looking for us on some lonely stretch of highway waiting for the right moment to climb back in. Story the end. The storm hadn't been in the forecast. That's what stuck with me the most afterward. I'd checked the weather twice before leaving Denver, and both times the app told me the skies would stay clear all the way across Utah. So when the first ripple of lightning spread across the plains like a cracked bone beneath skin, I felt the kind of unease you don't admit out loud when you're traveling alone. I'd been on the road since early morning, planning to make it to a cheap motel near Green River before midnight. The stretch of I-70 that cuts across eastern Utah is empty in a way that feels biblical. No houses, no towns, nothing but rock, sky, and the occasional semi roaring past like a ghost unwilling to stop. Most people find it beautiful. I used to. But that night, with the sky bruising dark and the wind starting to twist across the asphalt, beauty wasn't what came to mind. My gas tank was below a quarter. Normally, I would have stopped earlier, but the last service station had looked abandoned enough to be a set piece from a slasher film. Flickering lights, a pump wrapped in yellow caution tape, a single pickup parked sideways as if the driver had left in a hurry. I told myself I'd push on to the next one. Only out there, next one could mean another 50 miles. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, illuminating the mesas around me in a stark, colorless blaze. My radio cut to static, sputtered, and died. The wind blew my Honda slightly to the right, and I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. A sign appeared a moment later, lit dimly by my headlights. Rest area. I let out a shaky breath. It wasn't gas, but it was something, shelter, at least, if the storm got worse. I told myself I'd stop just until the worst passed. By the time I reached the rest area, rain had begun slashing sideways against the windshield. The lot was nearly empty except for two vehicles, a white cargo van parked against the far curb and an older RV with faded blue stripes. Both were dark inside, no signs of movement. I pulled into a spot near the main building, one of those concrete rest stops with vending machines and Coke-branded picnic tables inside. The moment I stepped out of the car, the wind nearly slammed the door back into me. I ran for the building, shoes slipping slightly on wet pavement. The automatic door stuttered before opening, as if reluctantly, and a rush of cold fluorescent light spilled across me. Inside, the air was stale, humming faintly from the flickering overhead lamps. Two vending machines buzzed on the far wall, and a row of travel brochures sat in a rack, most faded from sun exposure. The storm echoed off the building like someone was throwing handfuls of gravel against the roof. I shook off the rain and checked my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual for this stretch, but it made the emptiness feel heavier. I wandered toward the restrooms mostly to kill time. That's when I noticed something odd. The door to the men's room was propped open by a small wedge of wood, as if someone didn't want it to close. The women's room door was shut. A low clatter echoed from inside the men's room. Not loud, more like something metal rolling slowly across tile. "Hello?" I called. No answer. Another clatter. A faint scrape. I wasn't brave enough to investigate. I backed away, telling myself it was probably a loose soap dispenser or some trap of wind. But the way the noise came in deliberate intervals made my skin crawl. I returned to the main area and sat at a picnic table, listening to the storm build. Minutes passed. Maybe 10, maybe 15. My heartbeat eventually slowed. The storm began to let up. I leaned back, planning to bolt to my car the moment the rain lightened enough. That's when the automatic door slid open again. A man stepped inside, a tall man in a soaked brown jacket and jeans, water dripping from the hem. He had a beard, messy and uneven, as if he'd trimmed it with a pocket knife. His eyes scanned the room too quickly, then fixed on me. "Hell of a storm," he said. His voice was friendly enough, but something about it, maybe the forced casualness, pricked the back of my neck. "Yeah," I said. "Came out of nowhere." He wrung rain from his sleeves, then glanced toward the restrooms. "You here alone?" he asked. The kind of question that sounds innocent from the right person and dangerous from the wrong one. "My boyfriend's sleeping in the car," I lied immediately. "We're switching driving shifts once the rain lets up." The man's eyes flickered, not quite a smile, not quite a frown. "Smart," he said. "You never know who's out here." He walked toward the vending machines, boots squeaking. I tried not to stare, but I watched his reflection in the glass. He didn't put money in, didn't press anything. He just stood there, hunched slightly, breathing slow and heavy. Then he turned, not toward me, but toward the men's restroom. He pushed the door open wider with 2 fingers and leaned his head inside. I saw him nod once, as if acknowledging someone. He stepped inside and disappeared. Every instinct in me screamed to leave. I grabbed my keys, slipped out of the building, got out, and jogged toward my car. The rain had slowed to a mist. The sky still flickered with distant lightning. I got in and locked the doors immediately. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys the first time I tried to start the car. The engine finally turned and relief washed through me. Then the passenger door handle twitched. Not violently, just a small, deliberate test. Someone was pulling it. The locks held. I froze. A second yank. Harder. I slammed the car into reverse, tires squealing against the wet pavement. As I backed up, the passenger side mirror caught a shape. Someone hunched low beside my car, too close to have seen in the rain and darkness. I couldn't make out the face. I threw the car into drive and tore out of the rest area, fishtailing slightly as I hit the on-ramp. For a few miles, all I could hear was my pulse pounding in my ears. I kept checking the rearview mirror for headlights, but the road behind me stayed empty. Eventually, I breathed. Not well, not fully, but enough. I kept driving, counting mile markers, watching the gas gauge sink closer and closer to empty. I started rehearsing what I'd say if I had to knock on someone's farmhouse door in the middle of the night. Something about getting turned around, about needing help. Not the truth. The truth sounded insane even in my own mind. By the time the next sign appeared, gas 10 miles, my relief was dizzying. But a few moments later, before I reached it, something else appeared. A light. Flashing, I slowed instinctively. A vehicle was pulled over on the shoulder ahead, hazard lights blinking through the rain-soaked dark. As I approached, my headlights washed over it. A white cargo van, the same one from the rest area. There was no mistaking it. Same make, same smudged back windows, same dent on the passenger side panel. My breath caught. A man stepped out in front of the van, waving both arms. Even without seeing his face clearly, I knew. Same jacket, same height, same build. He was signaling for me to stop. I didn't. I swerved around him, heart in my throat. He shouted something, lost under the wind, and ran toward his van. For a long, nightmarish moment, I waited for headlights to appear behind me, gaining fast. None did. I drove another 10 miles, then 20. I reached the next service station, a bright, sprawling truck stop, and pulled into the lot, still gripping the steering wheel like it might float away. Inside the station, warm light and the murmur of travelers made the world feel real again. I stayed near other people, buying a bottled coffee I didn't drink, just holding it like some kind of anchor. When I worked up the nerve, I asked the cashier casually, "Does that rest area back up the highway usually get much traffic?" The woman shook her head. "Near Thompson? Hardly ever. They've been talking about shutting it down. Patrol says strange stuff happens out there sometimes, people messing with travelers. Last year I didn't want to know. I left, filled my tank, and took a different route off the highway, even though it added hours. I didn't stop again until I reached Green River at dawn. For weeks afterward, I checked every news site and local Utah forum I could find, expecting to see something, an arrest, a police report, anything that would explain what happened. I found nothing. Not a single mention of a man in a brown jacket. Not a white cargo van. Not a break-in attempt or suspicious activity in any rest areas along that stretch. But sometimes, especially when I'm driving alone at night, I remember the way that man nodded into the restroom like he was communicating with someone already waiting inside. Someone quiet. Someone patient. I don't think the man I saw was alone. And I don't think they were just trying door handles. I haven't driven that highway again. I avoid isolated rest stops entirely now. Because out there on those long, empty stretches of American desert, when the rain is falling sideways and the night feels like it's holding its breath, you learn something people don't like to talk about. Sometimes the scariest part of the road isn't the isolation. It's realizing you're not as alone as you thought. Story, the end. The first time I told anyone about what happened on that drive, they didn't believe me. They said exhaustion plays tricks on the mind, especially at night, especially on long, empty highways where the only company is the hum of your own engine. I don't blame them. Before that night, I wouldn't have believed me either. It started in late July, the kind of muggy heat that clings to your skin even after the sun goes down. I was driving from Reno to Denver, trying to make it in one long push because I'd already burned through my PTO visiting family. It was supposed to be an easy trip. I'd done it before. Gas, snacks, playlists, podcasts, just miles in silence. By the time I hit eastern Nevada, the desert was pitch black except for whatever my headlights could catch. You don't realize how dark a place can get until you're out there. No towns, no houses, not even those lone gas stations some movies pretend exist in the middle of nowhere. Just dirt, rock, and black sky. Around midnight, the road stretched straight ahead in that hypnotic way long highways do, every dashed white line pulling you forward. My eyes were getting heavy. I hadn't passed another car in nearly an hour, and the only thing keeping me awake was a flat energy drink and the AC blasting on high. That's when I first saw the shape. It was on the shoulder far up ahead, a dark silhouette, just barely distinguishable from the night. At first I thought it was a cow or maybe a broken down vehicle. But as I got closer, details sharpened. It was a man, standing, not waving, not signaling distress, just standing on the edge of the highway, facing the road. I slowed down out of instinct. You don't want to blow past someone who might need help, but there was something off about the way he was positioned. Too still, too stiff, like he'd been placed there. My brights washed over him when I got close enough. He looked middle-aged, maybe late 40s, wearing jeans and a dark flannel shirt. His face was pale, almost grayish, and his eyes seemed like they were fixed on me long before I arrived. He didn't move a muscle, not a blink, not a shift of weight, nothing. My gut screamed not to stop. I eased into the other lane and drove past slowly, half waiting for him to turn his head or raise his hand or do anything human. But he didn't. The last glimpse I got of him in the rearview mirror was just that same figure frozen in place, staring straight down the highway. A chill crawled up my spine, and I cranked the radio just to fill the silence. I told myself he was drunk, high, homeless, anything normal. But a few miles later, my heart rate still hadn't slowed. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. No cars, no towns, the road as empty as before. By this point, exhaustion was hitting me again. I kept telling myself to relax. The desert does weird things to the mind. People wander off from rest stops all the time. Maybe he was waiting for someone to come back for him. It wasn't my business. But then I saw him again. Same figure, same clothes, same stance, just standing on the shoulder ahead of me. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. There was no way. I had driven at least 30 miles since I passed him. There were no turnoffs, no side roads, nothing he could have taken to get ahead of me. Yet there he was. He wasn't waving. He wasn't asking for help. He was waiting. This time I didn't slow down. If anything, I sped up, changing lanes early. As I passed him, my brights catching his face, the grayish tint of his skin looked even worse. His clothes looked dusty, like he'd been standing in that spot for days. His mouth was slightly open, and I swear I saw something dark around his lips, dried and flaked. His eyes followed me as I passed. Not his head, not his body, just his eyes. I know how impossible that sounds, but I promise you that's what happened. His gaze slid across me, tracking my movement, even as the rest of him stayed perfectly still. I didn't check the rearview mirror this time. My foot pressed down harder on the gas. The road kept pulling me forward, but every time I blinked, I saw his face burned into the back of my eyelids, lifeless eyes that somehow still knew exactly where I was. About 15 minutes later, I saw lights in the distance. A relief I didn't know I needed. A gas station, one of those isolated ones meant for truckers. The bright neon glow against the darkness made me feel like I was re-entering the world of normal people. I pulled in fast, parked crooked, and went inside. The clerk glanced at me with the usual disinterest, but my hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the coffee machine with both hands just to steady myself. The clerk didn't say a word until I brought the drink up to the counter. "You look like hell," he said, monotone. "Long night," I managed. He scanned the cup. "You see anything weird out there?" My heart stalled. "Why?" He shrugged, but the movement looked forced, like he didn't want to admit something. Couple truckers came through earlier, said they saw someone standing on the highway, but when they turned around, nobody was there. I swallowed hard. "Did they describe him?" Another shrug. "Tall guy, dark clothes, face looked wrong." He paused. "Sound familiar?" I didn't answer. I took the coffee and walked back to my car, but the idea of getting back on that highway made me feel physically sick. I debated staying at the station until sunrise, maybe even sleeping in my car, but a weird sense of urgency pushed at me, a need to get the hell out of Nevada. I got back on the highway reluctantly. For about 20 minutes, nothing happened. No dark shapes, no figures, no impossible eyes following me. The coffee helped keep me alert. The moon came out from behind the clouds, lighting more of the desert around me. I started telling myself I imagined everything. That stress and exhaustion can create shared hallucinations, and that maybe the truckers just scared themselves too. And then I saw the third one. This time he wasn't on the shoulder. He was in the lane, standing dead center on the asphalt facing me. I slammed the brakes, tires screeching so loudly it echoed across the desert. I skidded to a halt 30 yards away from him. My headlights framed him perfectly. Same man, same clothes, same gray skin, but something had changed. His head was tilted sharply to the side, like his neck had been partially snapped. His mouth hung open wider, unnaturally wide. And his eyes, God, his eyes, were locked straight onto mine. I was trapped there, engine idling, hands trembling so hard on the wheel I could hear my knuckles crack. The air in the car felt thick, like it didn't want to move. He didn't approach. He didn't gesture. He just watched me. My breathing grew shallow. My vision tunneled. The world shrank to that one impossible figure on the road. Every instinct screamed to reverse, to turn around, to drive back to the gas station, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. Then he moved. Not toward me, not aside. He just shifted, like he'd flickered in place. One moment he was standing normally, and the next his shoulders were twisted at a sharper angle. His body didn't move between positions, it simply changed positions. And suddenly, the distance between us felt like nothing. I slammed the gas pedal so hard my heels slipped. The car lurched forward. For a split second, I thought I was going to hit him. The car passed through the spot he was standing, and for one horrifying fraction of a moment, I felt something cold brush through me, like driving through ice water. I didn't look in the mirrors. I didn't slow down. I drove with a kind of desperation I've never felt before, my whole body pulsing with adrenaline. The next hour is a blur of speeding across the desert, whispering to myself to stay awake, stay alert, don't look back. Every shadow on the horizon looked like a figure. Every road sign felt like an omen. I didn't breathe normally again until the sky started lightening with the first hints of dawn. When I finally reached a populated area, real houses, real people, real trucks on the road, I pulled over in front of a diner and sat there for a full 10 minutes trying to stop shaking. I went inside eventually, ordered pancakes I barely touched, and told myself none of it made sense. None of it was real. But as I left the diner, heading back toward my car, I noticed something that turned my stomach inside out. Gray dust, all over the passenger side door, smudged in long, finger-shaped streaks, like someone had dragged their hand across it. I didn't go back to Nevada after that trip. I avoid that entire stretch of road now, even if it means adding hours to my route. And every once in a while, maybe once or twice a year, I'll see something on a late-night highway that makes my chest tighten. A lone figure, standing still, facing the road, waiting. Story, the end. The rain had been following me since Cheyenne, moving in thick gray sheets that made the highway look like a long, slick ribbon fading into white. I had left Denver late that morning, planning to cross Wyoming and reach Twin Falls by night. It was a familiar route for me. My job had me driving these stretches of interstate more often than I slept in my own bed. Still, something about that day felt off, though I couldn't say why at the time. I remember passing a weather-beaten sign advertising an upcoming gas station, last services for 60 miles, and debating whether to pull off. I still had half a tank. I figured I'd be fine, so I kept driving. 20 minutes later, the rain fell harder, landing in bursts that made my wipers struggle to keep up. The wind shoved the truck from side to side. The plains on either side of the highway were empty, wide, flat spaces that looked like the world had been scraped clean. My phone buzzed. No service. Expected. Annoying anyway. That was when I saw the first car, a silver sedan, pulled off on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking slowly through the rain. A woman stood outside trying to wave down passing cars. She wasn't holding an umbrella, so she was soaked head to toe. Her hair was plastered to her face, and she kept pushing it away with frantic, jerky movements. I should have stopped. Anyone would say that. But the rain, the isolation, the way she moved like she was about to jump in front of the next car, it rattled me. And stopping on a slick interstate in a storm felt like asking for trouble. So I drove past. In my rearview mirror, I watched the blinking hazards blur into a red smear until the rain swallowed them. An hour passed, then 90 minutes. The storm let up a little, and the sky shifted into a bruised purple evening. I kept glancing at my fuel gauge, calculating whether I had enough to make the next town. When I finally saw an exit sign with the word Pine Bend, 2 miles, I felt the knot in my chest loosen. I pulled off the interstate into a winding 2-lane road that cut through a dense cluster of pines. It felt like I had driven into another world. The air was still, heavy, and the wet asphalt reflected my headlights like a mirror. The first building I saw was a gas station, if you could call it that. It looked abandoned. Only one pump remained standing, crooked and rusted. The sign overhead flickered but never fully lit up, like it was struggling to remember how to be alive. But the lights inside the convenience store were on. Against my better judgment, I pulled up near the entrance. The rain had finally weakened to a sprinkle. When I stepped out of the truck, the smell of damp pine hit me so hard it felt artificial, like a store-bought candle-scented forest night. As I approached the door, it slid open with a slow, shaking buzz. The inside was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that pressed against your ears. A man stood behind the counter. His face was expressionless, sagging around the eyes, and he didn't look up when I walked in. His clothes looked old-fashioned, plaid shirt, worn suspenders, and a name tag that only said M, nothing else. "Evening," I said. He didn't respond. I browsed the aisles, pretending everything was normal. The shelves weren't dusty, but the products looked wrong. Expiration dates all showed early 2000s. All the chip bags were brands I hadn't seen since I was a kid. Even the candy bars looked like designs that had been discontinued. Everything was neatly arranged, as though someone spent hours making sure everything lined up perfectly. I grabbed a bottle of water and a bag of pretzels. When I approached the counter, the man finally raised his head. His eyes were extremely light, almost white, and they didn't seem to focus on me. "Pump outside work?" I asked. He lifted one hand and pointed toward the window without saying a word. "Okay, thanks." When I handed him the money, his hand brushed mine. His skin was ice cold. The automatic door creaked as I walked out and nearly made me jump. The pump worked, though the numbers on the screen glitched every few seconds. While I filled the tank, I kept glancing toward the forest behind the station. The trees looked wrong, leaning in unnatural angles, as if they had shifted in the wind, only there was no wind now, just a suffocating calm. Then I saw something between the pines, a shape, human-shaped, standing perfectly still, watching me. I froze, and for several seconds I convinced myself it was just a tree trunk. But then it moved only slightly, like it tilted its head. My heart slammed against my ribs. I capped the tank, practically dove into my truck, and fired up the engine. Before I drove off, I looked once more at the figure. It was gone. When I pulled back onto the 2-lane road, the darkness felt thicker. My headlights cut a narrow path through it, but beyond that beam, everything looked smeared and shifting. I kept my eyes glued ahead, but my hands kept trembling. 10 minutes later, I passed another car on the shoulder. Same silver sedan. Hazards blinking. Someone was inside now. A man. Or at least I thought it was a man. He sat very still, hands on the steering wheel like he'd been frozen. The woman I had seen earlier was nowhere around. I slowed down enough to look, and his head suddenly snapped toward me. His eyes were pure white, just like the clerk. I hit the gas pedal so hard the truck fishtailed before catching traction. My breath kept catching in my throat as I sped down the road. A minute later, I saw the glow of headlights behind me in the rearview mirror. The silver sedan. I pressed the accelerator harder. Its headlights grew closer. My phone still said no service. The road twisted, and the trees leaned in, creating a tunnel of shadows that swallowed most of the sky. The sedan stayed right on me, close enough that I could see the cracks in its windshield. At one point, it pulled into the oncoming lane like it was about to ram me. I swerved sharply, and the truck nearly went off the road. Then the sedan fell back. Just a little. Enough to give me hope. I spotted another road sign up ahead, Twin Falls 47 miles, and felt a tiny flicker of relief. If I could just get to town, get near people, get into any public place. But the sedan sped up again, headlights blinding me through my mirrors. That was when the road widened into a patch of construction. Cones and barriers forced traffic into one lane, though there was no construction crew, no equipment, nothing but a dozen orange cones placed haphazardly. I slowed. The sedan didn't. It shot past me on the left and screeched to a stop sideways in the middle of the road, blocking my path. There was no time to think. I veered hard right, missing the sedan by inches, and crashed through a line of cones. The truck jolted violently as it tore into a side dirt path hidden in the dark. Mud splattered across the windshield. Branches slapped against the windows. I kept driving blindly until the path opened into a clearing. Then the engine died. Just shut off. No sputter. No low fuel cough. Just silence. I turned the key. Nothing. When I looked up, the woods around the clearing felt alive. Every tree seemed to shiver at once, though there wasn't a breeze. The darkness between the trunks shifted like something was moving through it. Then I heard footsteps, slow, crunching leaves, approaching the truck. I tried the key again, nothing. My breathing turned into hyperventilation. Something emerged from the tree line. Not the man, not the woman, something else. Tall, long-limbed, moving like each joint bent the wrong way. Its skin was gray and stretched tight, and its face, the face was the worst part. It had no features except a mouth that ran too far across the lower half of its head like someone carved a grin into clay and kept stretching it. It walked right toward the driver's side. I slammed the door lock button. Its head tilted. Then, tap. One finger pressed against the glass. Slow, deliberate. It leaned in closer, its fogging the window, though I didn't see a nose or nostrils. I don't know what instinct possessed me, but I suddenly crawled over the console and shoved myself into the passenger seat. I kicked the door open and sprinted into the forest. Branches cut my face. Mud soaked my socks. I ran without direction, fueled by a panic so intense I barely felt my legs. Behind me I heard movement. Not footsteps, more like skittering, like nails raking bark. I didn't look back, after what felt like an hour, but later I realized it was probably less than 10 minutes. I saw a faint orange light through the trees. A campfire. I stumbled toward it, breaking through the tree line into a small clearing where 3 hikers sat around a fire pit. They all turned toward me, startled. I collapsed onto the dirt. They asked if I was all right. What happened? Did I need help? I tried to speak, but my voice came out in broken gasps. One of them, a guy in his 30s, offered me water. Another pulled out a satellite phone. I begged them not to call anyone from the local area. I must have sounded insane, but they listened anyway. They called state police using coordinates from their GPS. When the officers arrived over an hour later, nothing followed them. Nothing moved in the trees. They found my truck the next morning, perfectly intact. But the clearing I described didn't exist. There was no construction zone, no abandoned gas station, no silver sedan on any surveillance footage or reports. The officers insisted the storm probably disoriented me. They said I was exhausted, maybe hallucinating. But sometimes, late at night, I still see that figure in my mind. The long limbs, the mouth that wasn't made for speaking, the pale eyes of the clerk, the white-eyed man in the sedan. And I remember one detail that still makes my skin crawl. When the hikers found me, my clothes were soaked, but it hadn't rained in Pine Bend for 2 days. Story the end. The sun had just dipped below the horizon when Alex and Jenna hit the empty stretch of Highway 68, the kind of road that seems to disappear into the darkness. They had left their college town in Ohio early that morning, aiming for a quick weekend getaway in upstate Michigan. The trip had started with typical small talk and playlists blasting from the car speakers, but as night fell, the energy shifted. It started with a flat tire. Jenna was driving when she noticed the car wobbling slightly. Alex pulled over onto the shoulder and they got out to inspect it. The spare tire in the trunk was barely usable, with more dry rot than tread. "Great," Alex muttered, glancing down the desolate highway. "We're stuck out here." There weren't many options, but a faint light flickered in the distance, maybe a gas station or a roadside diner. They decided to try their luck. The drive was tense. Every passing shadow of a tree looked like a person. The car's headlights barely pierced the thick darkness, and the wind whistled through the cracked window. When they finally reached the light, it wasn't a station at all, but an old convenience store that looked like it hadn't been open in decades. The neon sign buzzed erratically, flickering "open" in broken letters. They stepped inside, and the smell of damp wood and mildew hit them. Behind the counter sat a man who looked like he hadn't moved in years. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. He didn't speak. He just nodded toward a shelf with canned food and bottled water. Jenna picked up a few items, and Alex dropped some bills on the counter. The man didn't touch them, didn't acknowledge them at all, just stared at the wall behind them. When they left, Alex suggested they just drive until they found a proper town. The road seemed endless, cutting through dark, dense forests. About 30 minutes in, Jenna's phone buzzed with a weak signal. It was a text from an unknown number. "Turn back." "Probably a wrong number," Jenna said, but a shiver ran down her spine. Another text followed a few minutes later. "Don't keep going." Alex laughed nervously. "Okay, that's enough. Someone's messing with us." The first thing they noticed was the smell before they saw anything, a metallic, almost burnt odor that made their stomachs twist. The car's headlights caught something on the side of the road. A black sedan parked halfway in the ditch, doors open, no one inside. As they drove past, Alex's stomach dropped. The car was empty, but on the driver's seat was a single pair of shoes, perfectly aligned, facing the windshield. "Who leaves shoes like that?" Jenna whispered. They drove faster, and the road became worse, crumbling asphalt and potholes that rattled the suspension. The trees on either side grew thicker, almost forming a tunnel. That's when they saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. At first, they thought it was a hitchhiker. But as they slowed down, the figure didn't move, didn't flinch. It was too tall, too thin, with long limbs hanging unnaturally. Jenna slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The figure vanished into the forest before their eyes. "Did you see that?" she screamed. I don't know," Alex said, swallowing hard. "Maybe it was just a deer or something." They passed the spot quickly, and the silence in the car was suffocating. Then the phone buzzed again, but this time there was a voicemail. Alex played it. A distorted, almost inhuman voice whispered, "You shouldn't be here." Panic set in. They decided to pull over, thinking maybe stopping and checking a map could help. But as they rolled to a stop, the car's headlights flickered and went out completely. Jenna grabbed a flashlight from the glove box, and Alex tried the hazard lights. Nothing. The forest was alive with the sounds of snapping branches, rustling leaves, and low, guttural noises that seemed impossibly close. "Alex, I don't like this," Jenna said, her voice shaking. Just stay calm. We need to get out of here," he replied, fumbling with the car doors. Suddenly, from the woods on the right, a low figure darted across the road. Alex slammed the gear into reverse, tires spinning in the gravel. They managed to get the car moving, but whatever it was, it seemed to follow them. Every time they looked in the rearview mirror, shadows danced just at the edge of the tree line. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt distorted. The road never ended, and the forest never thinned. Jenna's phone buzzed continuously with messages. "Turn around. Leave now. They are watching." Then they saw lights ahead, a small cluster of buildings. Relief washed over them. They drove toward it and realized it was a motel, the kind with a flickering neon sign advertising vacancy. The parking lot was empty, but lights shone from a few windows. They parked and went inside, hoping for a room. The clerk was an older woman with sunken eyes and a brittle smile. "You're lucky," she said. "We had a room left." They handed over their IDs and money, and she handed them a key. But as they walked to the room, they noticed something strange. Every door on the hallway had shoes lined up in front, just like the ones they had seen on the roadside. And every window had a faint silhouette inside, watching them. The room smelled damp and old, like the convenience store, and the lights flickered. Jenna locked the door, and they both collapsed onto the bed, exhausted. But then the phone buzzed again. This time it was a video message. They hesitated, but curiosity got the better of them. It showed a live feed of their car outside the motel, except the angle was impossible, as if the camera was floating. And standing next to the car was that same tall, thin figure. Its face was indistinguishable, but the movements were deliberate, almost playful. A pounding at the door made them jump. The woman's voice outside whispered, "Check your shoes." Alex and Jenna hesitated, then slowly looked down. Their shoes were gone. And in their place were two sets of larger, grotesque shoes, shaped like claws. Panic turned to terror. They ran to the door, but it wouldn't open. Windows were barred. Then the power cut out completely. The pounding got louder, closer. Whatever it was, it had found them. Hours or maybe moments later, the power returned. They looked around the room. Nothing. No sounds. No movement. But on the wall, scrawled in the condensation from the broken air conditioner, was a message. "Next time, we will wait on the road." When morning finally came, the motel was empty. The clerk, the other guests, even the shoes, they were all gone. The forest seemed less oppressive in daylight, but the road ahead was endless again, stretching into the horizon with no signs of civilization. They drove for hours, eventually finding a small town and reporting the motel and the messages, but no record of the place existed. No one remembered the convenience store either, and the stretch of Highway 68 where everything had started was normal, devoid of any signs of what had happened the night before. Alex and Jenna never returned to that road, but they still get texts from unknown numbers sometimes, always in the same distorted voice. You shouldn't be here. Some nights, when Jenna drives alone, she swears she sees figures at the edge of the forest watching, waiting, and she always remembers the shoes. Story the end. The last time I ever agreed to a spontaneous road trip was in the summer of 2017. I was 26, freshly free from a job I'd hated, and hungry for some kind of release before starting the next chapter of my life. My friend Marcus had the same idea. We'd known each other since high school, the kind of friend you don't talk to for months but can fall right back in step with. When he called me on a Tuesday afternoon and said, "Let's head west, no plans, no hotels, just drive until we're somewhere interesting," I said yes without thinking. We left from Louisville, heading toward the Rockies with nothing but backpacks, a tent, and an aging blue Ford Escape that rattled any time it hit 70. The first 2 days were everything a road trip should be. Loud music, cheap gas station snacks, and endless stretches of open highway that made the world feel huge again. We camped behind a church one night, then near an empty cattle pasture the next. It was reckless in a way that only feels possible when the weather's warm and life hasn't hurt you recently. I didn't know how quickly that feeling would unravel. On the third day, somewhere west of Kansas City, storm clouds rolled in fast and heavy. We checked radar earlier that morning, but nothing had shown up. Out there, though, the sky can change its mind in minutes. By late afternoon, the wind was cutting across the highway like it was trying to push us off it. Marcus squinted over the steering wheel and said, "We should find a place to stop," but the exits in that stretch were almost non-existent. When we finally saw a sign, Glenalan, 12 miles, we both exhaled. The town wasn't on any map we'd looked at, not even the big paper atlas Marcus kept in the glove box. But small towns pop up all the time in the Midwest, and we were too tired to care. The exit ramp curved down into thick trees, and almost immediately the road narrowed to 2 lanes. The storm hit full force as we crept forward, sheets of rain hammering the windshield hard enough that the wipers kept skipping. The glare of the headlights on wet asphalt made everything look warped. When we passed the crooked wooden sign that read, "Glenalan, welcome home," the lights flickered, like the bulbs themselves were uneasy. The town was wrong. Not obviously at first, just unsettling. The buildings looked old but not abandoned, paint peeling, windows dusty, roofs sagging. But there were lights on in houses, faint yellow glows behind curtains, though we saw no movement. No cars on the street, no people walking, not even a dog in a yard. The storm had driven everyone inside, I told myself. That was all. "What the hell is this place?" Marcus murmured, slowing as we approached what looked like a main street. "Looks like time forgot about it," I said, though the words didn't feel like a joke. We found an old gas station on the corner, one of those places that still had a mechanical pump. The sign said open, but the place looked anything but. Windows fogged, lights dull, no cars under the awning. The price per gallon was so low it had to be wrong, like it hadn't been updated in 15 years. Marcus parked under the awning and jogged to the station door. I could see him tug at it, then peer inside, then pull again more firmly. He came back shaking his head. "Locked, but the lights are on." Before I could respond, someone knocked on my window. I jumped so hard my knee hit the dashboard. A woman stood outside, drenched from the rain but smiling like she'd been waiting for us. Her hair clung to her face, gray streaks plastered to her cheeks, and her clothes looked out of place, like something from the 1970s. A thick tan jacket, bell-bottom jeans soaked to the knee, boots caked in mud. I cracked the window only an inch. Instinct. "You folks need gas?" she asked. Her voice was friendly enough, but it held a strange flatness behind the tone, like she was reciting lines she'd practiced. "Yeah," I said. Is the station open? She smiled wider. It's open for folks passing through. You're welcome to pump. We can't pay if the register's closed, Marcus said from the driver's side. Oh, don't worry about that, she said, waving him off. Just fill up. We like to make sure travelers get where they're going. Something about that sentence prickled under my skin, like she wasn't saying it as a kindness, like it was an obligation or a warning. Marcus shrugged because he was trusting in ways I no longer am. He pumped the gas. The needle slowly climbed, though the pump made a grinding noise like it hadn't been used in ages. I watched the woman. She stood under the awning, smiling at the ground, rainwater dripping off her hair. She never blinked, not once. When the tank was full, Marcus thanked her. She nodded once, then turned and walked away, not toward any house, not toward the gas station, not toward a car. She walked straight down the road into the storm until we couldn't see her anymore. We both got back into the car and shut the doors at the same time. Dude, Marcus whispered, that was weird, right? Weirder than weird. Should we try to talk to someone else? I think we should get out of this town. He nodded, started the engine, and pulled back onto the road. The storm quieted a little, but the sky stayed low and angry. We passed houses that looked inhabited but still saw no one outside. Curtains twitched in one window, but only for a moment. A streetlight buzzed and flickered overhead, and the sound echoed down the empty street like a wasp trapped in a bottle. At the far end of town, the road split, left or right. Neither direction had a sign. Marcus hesitated. Which way? Right, I said, because the left felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. He turned right. 5 minutes later, the road curved sharply, then climbed a small hill. Trees thickened around us. The rain eased off, leaving behind only the sound of wet tires on pavement. Then the headlights swept across a sign at the side of the road. Glenalyn, welcome home. Marcus hit the brakes so hard we both lurched forward. No. We didn't turn around. We didn't, he said. We didn't, I echoed. He backed up slowly until the sign disappeared into darkness, then drove forward again. Same result. The road simply looped us back to Glenalyn. At this point, the air inside the car felt thin. My chest was tight. I said, take the left road. We shouldn't have second-guessed it. Marcus nodded. We drove back through town, still no people, and took the left road this time. It sloped downward, winding between old barns and open fields. For a moment, I let myself relax. The road felt like it was taking us somewhere new. Then the headlights hit the same sign again. Glenalyn, welcome home. I felt my stomach drop. Marcus pulled over this time. He put his head in his hands, his breathing sharp and uneven. I stared at the sign, the bold white letters that somehow looked more sinister now. We're stuck, he whispered. No, there has to be another road. But we both knew that wasn't true. We'd seen every street in that tiny place. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the silhouette of the town. For a split second, I saw shapes moving between the houses. Not people. Shorter, thinner, like children standing still in the rain. But when the lightning faded, nothing was there. Let's try one more time, Marcus said, his voice steady. We'll go slow. We'll watch for anything we missed. We drove through Glenalyn again, but this time it was different. Every house had lights on now. Bright lights. Too bright. The curtains were open, and behind every window we could see silhouettes. Dozens of them. Human shapes standing perfectly still facing the street, watching us. I grabbed Marcus's arm. Go now. He pressed the gas, and the escape shot forward. Houses blurred past. The silhouettes didn't move, not even a twitch. As we neared the edge of town, the woman from the gas station stepped into the road. Marcus screamed. I grabbed the wheel. The car swerved wildly, fishtailed, and finally skidded to a stop inches from her. She leaned toward the windshield, smiling that same unmoving smile. You shouldn't be here after dark, she said. Not unless you plan on staying. Her eyes were wrong. Too bright. Too wide. Like she wasn't looking at us, but through us. Marcus reversed so fast the tires spit gravel. But the woman didn't chase us. She just stood there, smiling in the rain. We didn't slow down until we reached the center of town again. And that was when we saw the people. They were lining the sidewalks now, hundreds of them. Men, women, children, all soaked, all silent, all smiling. Every single face held the same fixed expression as the woman's. Identical. Unnatural. Marcus whispered, "They want us to stay." I said nothing. My hands were shaking too hard even to form words. He drove forward, slowly at first, then faster as the figures leaned slightly toward the street, as if listening to the engine's rumble. When the road split again, we didn't choose. We barreled straight through into a ditch, scraping across rock and mud until the tires caught enough traction to climb back onto asphalt. And suddenly, we were outside the town. Just like that. The rain stopped. The sky cleared. Behind us, the road was empty. Glenallen was gone. Not just far away. Gone. No lights. No buildings. No sign. Marcus didn't stop driving for an hour. Neither of us spoke. Eventually, we found ourselves on a major highway. The world normal again. We never found Glenallen on any map. We never spoke about it in detail again. But sometimes, when the weather turns humid in late summer, I think about those faces in the windows and the way they all smiled the exact same way, like something was wearing them instead of inhabiting them. Sometimes I dream about the woman's voice saying, "We like to make sure travelers get where they're going." And sometimes, worst of all, I hear those last words again, "Not unless you plan on staying." I haven't gone on a road trip since. Story the end.